Welcome to the Solution Nation podcast. My name is Sean Snowday, and I'm the president of Solution Nation. Solution Nation is dedicated to providing a platform for investors to learn about Israel's most dynamic public and private companies. We interview lead venture capitalists, Wall Street analysts, investment bankers, and managers of incubators and accelerators. Today's guest is Moran Hadad, and the topic is the Israel-Cambodia economic ecosystem. Now combine the world's greatest innovation machine with a fertile land hungry for development, and you have tremendous opportunities. Cambodia is rapidly developing, more stable than many believe, and already sophisticated in terms of banking, communications, and regulations. Please remember that all content provided on the Solution Nation podcast and website is for educational purposes only. Nothing shall be construed as investment advice. Investment decisions shall not be made based on information, written, verbal, or otherwise, posted or spoken on Solution Nation. Conduct your own research or consult with your own investment advisors before making investment decisions. So here's my good friend, the host of the show, and the CEO of Solution Nation, David Wanatik.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Solution Nation's podcast series. I'm David Wanatik. Today's session is going to be very fascinating. The focus of today's program is the Israel-Cambodia economic ecosystem. Speaking to us today is Moran Hadad, who is the president of the Cambodia-Israel Chamber of Commerce. Moran, thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome, David. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So before we get started into Cambodia, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be involved with Cambodia.
Oh, it's actually a funny story. I'm an engineer, polytechnic engineer originally. I've been working in emerging markets most of my adult life. I actually came to Cambodia a little bit by chance. I was looking for information about cashew nut, so I Googled cashew nut, and I found information about India, Vietnam, and Cambodia. India and Vietnam are countries I was familiar with, and I figured, okay, let's go and see what's happening in Cambodia. So I landed there in Siem Reap. I rented a bike, and I was looking for cashew nut farms so I can learn about cashew nuts. And I was mostly surprised by the welcome. I always say Cambodians are amongst the nicest people there is out there. So that the first thing that struck me was how nice people were. And I always said I came to Cambodia for the cashew nut. I came back for the people, and I stayed for the potential. So that was my first encounter, and I promised my host I'll come back. So I did, because I'm a man of my word. And then I came again and again and again. And now about 7 years later, I'm spending most of my time in Cambodia.
Okay, great. So before the call, you mentioned that you have a startup. So is the startup involved with cashew nuts or something else?
No. My startup is a climate tech startup. We developed what we believe to be a beginning of a solution for three major issues, which are global warming, bigger than that, natural ecosystem restoration, and the fight against illegal logging. Okay.
Great. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but maybe we could just learn a little bit more about Cambodia. Are there any major impressions you want to tell us about as far as Cambodia? You mentioned that people are very warm and hospitable. Any other major impressions you have, or I can ask specific questions?
Cambodia is, first of all, it's a place with great culture. They had two great empires in the past, the Funan Empire and then the Khmer Empire. You can actually feel it in the people. It's very embedded in who they are. There's a big part of national pride, which is something I really like. I say it as a joke, but in reality, it's true. A lot of my Cambodian friends, they tell me, yeah, maybe one day you'll become Cambodian, but you'll never be Khmer. And that's something I really like. It shows identity. And I think identity is one of the key ingredients for success. So I think that's something that is very, very strong, this Khmer identity and the heavy culture. Other than this, really the niceness of the people and the huge potential. I mean, the average age in Cambodia is 24 and a half. So it's a very young nation with a lot of youngsters that are eager to learn, which for me is very exciting.
Okay. Is there any Jewish community in Cambodia, maybe of expats or abided in Cambodia?
We have around a few hundreds of Jewish people. We have a Bet Chabad at Phnom Penh. So there is a Jewish community. We do have Shabbat and things like this. It's not a big community yet. The Israeli community is even smaller. But I think Cambodia has been kind of a hidden gem in the region. Everybody knows Thailand and Vietnam. Those are the big countries, right? And a lot of people just stepped over Cambodia. And I think that now Cambodia is gaining more and more attention. And they can really benefit from what they have, and more people are interested. We'll discuss it in the following questions. But I really believe there's a lot of warming up in the relationship, particularly between Israel and Cambodia, but also Cambodia with other countries. People tend to understand what's going on, and they tend to slowly see the tremendous potential in Cambodia. So more and more people come, and this is also true for Israelis. More and more Israeli companies are interested in arriving. I see it within my job as the head of the Israeli Chamber of Commerce. I'm getting a lot of people contacting me and asking questions and wanting to come and see, and are more and more curious to come and discover.
Okay, great. And then are there any Cambodians in Israel, guest workers or anything like that?
No, there are. Every year there's a program sending about 300 Cambodians to Israel for 11 months. It's an agriculture program where they go to study agriculture for a year, working in fields and having hands-on study there. And so every year we have between 300 to 400 Cambodians in Israel. Other than this, there's not a big Cambodian community, but I do know some Cambodians that just did that are now Ole Hadash, that are acclimating to the lifestyle of Tel Aviv. So yeah, not a lot, but there are some, and hopefully more and more in the future. One of my goals is to have Cambodian students studying in Israeli universities, not only for a program, but really for the entire study cycle. I think it's a great opportunity for Cambodians and also for Israelis.
Sure. Maybe we can talk about some of the aspects of doing business in Cambodia. Perhaps we can start by talking about culture or language. Maybe with language. They have a French, some history with France. So is the dominant foreign language for them English or French, and how well do they speak the English or French?
I guess the dominant foreign language will be Chinese. Probably. I don't have the stats about it, but most Cambodians speak English, and pretty well. Cambodia is very friendly in terms of language. The French, it's more like the older generation that still speak French. Some of the the sectarian and plus that still have the language. The youngsters, they speak English, Chinese, some of them Thai and Vietnamese as well.
Okay, great. Any thing we should know about their culture if we go to Cambodia to try to do business? Anything we should be sensitive about? Or
Cambodian are it's a funny thing that in this country is in the same time a developing country, but in the same time very modern. It's a very I think probably Bangkok, Thailand has been like this about 25 years ago. So you can really see both. Cambodian are very modern, but in the same time they do have this ancestral culture of honor. So the one thing that Cambodian do not like is to lose face. One other thing is connected to this is that they don't like to say no because they're not confrontual. So they would rather say yes than no, but you need to learn in between the lines if the yes is a no or a yes. But working in Cambodia is something that you kind of pick up on pretty fast. You see when the no is a no and when the yes is a yes or a yes is a no. So these are the few adjustments I think that needs to be done. The style of work is a bit different for me as an Israeli going to Cambodia. It was a little bit. It took me a little bit time to get used to because we like to put pressure, positive pressure. We like the you can do it mentality is something that is very strong. But with Cambodian workers, sometimes if you put too much positive pressure, they feel that they will not be able to live up to your expectation, and they rather quit. So that's something I had to learn and measure. So you need to find the balance between the positive pressure and the understanding of the local culture and the question of not losing face. I think that's the main thing people need to get used to.
What about gift giving? Are you expected to bring a gift when you meet a business partner in Cambodia? And then is it a more formal culture or less formal? Do you address people by their first names or their family names?
Gifting happens. It's not a must. If you don't come with a gift, people will not be offended. But it is custom when you come somewhere to bring a little something. It is rather I would say rather of a formal community. You know, in Asia, comparing to the West, we use the names upside down. You know, in Europe or Israel, we start with your first name and then your family name. In Asia, it's the other way around. They present themselves first with a family name, which can create confusion. So I think when you're a foreign, it doesn't really matter how you call them, as long as it's respectful, because you mix the names and the surnames anyway, right? For us, many times we're not sure which is the first name or the surname, because those names are new to us, right? So they're not very particular on it. I never had any issue with calling someone the wrong name. I think as long as you're respectful in Cambodia, there shouldn't be any problem.
Okay. So is their decision-making process relatively fast, or is it slower? So Israelis like to make decisions fast. And
it's a dynamic country, so things happen very fast. I always say when I leave Cambodia for 2 months, when I come back, people almost forgot who I was, because 2 months in Cambodia is like 6 months in Europe. It's a much faster rhythm. Everything happens faster. Decision making is faster. I think the main thing is trust. Asian people in general, Cambodian in particular, they will not engage if they don't trust. And building trust might take time. So the question is not as much as the decision making process, but the time that they need to feel comfortable and to trust you as a person. I think that's something that might take time. You need to, we are in Israel. We're very toughless, right? We can, when you go to Israel as a foreign and you meet people, one of the first questions they'll ask you is how much money you make, which in Europe is a no-no, right? You don't ask people that question. It's a private information. In Israel, it's normal, and it's not coming from a jealousy point of view. It's not to see if they make more than you. It's if you make more than them, they will ask you how you do it, and they would like to emulate what you do, because they always try to do better. In Asia, it's a bit different. We don't have this direct business tachlis talk. The first time you meet a Cambodian, you're going to talk about anything but business. They want to know who you are. I think they give a lot of importance to who you are as a person. Rather, in Israel, it's more about what you do. So that's something that actually I appreciate, because it allows you to have deep connections. Takes in Israel as well. Israel, we have this brotherhood, right? But with the Cambodian, you can really build relationships, and those relationships are important for them.
Okay, great. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what it was like to start a business in Cambodia. First, just to get it established legally, was that easy or difficult?
Cambodia is a very modern country to that extent. I mean, when I arrived to Cambodia, it was a little bit more complicated. I say more complicated because I wasn't able to do it online. Today, a few years later, you can do everything online. It takes a little bit more than a week. So everything, you can be a full owner of your business as a foreign in Cambodia. You don't need to have a local partner. The only limitation you'll have is on purchasing land. Other than this, you have full autonomy as a foreign. You can own a company and you can set it up very, very quickly.
Okay. How do you feel about the honor of contracts? If you have a dispute with your landlord or an employee or a business partner, can you go to a court? Do you feel that it's a fair legal system and that the contracts really mean what they say?
I would say yes and no. For the most, yes. Specifically in the business realm, if you work with companies, contracts mean something, and you can go to lawyers and go to court. Most of the time, from my experience, things are resolved in a friendly manner. You have a third party that will judge the situation. I never had to go to court myself for any of the conflicts we had. When it's about landlords and stuff, when it's private, it might be a little bit more complicated because courts are in Khmer, right? They're not in English. So you need a Khmer lawyer. And you always feel, I think in any country, when you're not local, it's a little bit more, it's something you don't want to go and swim in those waters, specifically when it's a country with such a different culture and different language. But if you're as a businessman, you have both local law firms that are very well established and international law firms that can represent you, and you can defend yourself. It's not a dangerous country in that sense, but it's not it's not the same as in Europe or Israel or United States, where the legal system is so well established. It still is a developing country in the last stages of its development, so it's rather safe. But some people did have other experience than I did. I guess it goes together with this question of honor. When you do things that are non-honorable, it becomes more complicated. But I think if you conduct yourself in a respectful manner and you do proper business, there's a low probability of having problems in Cambodia.
So do you feel that the government is sufficiently stable, that the government won't arbitrarily increase the tax rates tomorrow, or that tomorrow they won't say you have to have a Cambodian business partner?
No, I think for that regard, Cambodia is an excellent place to be. The government is far from being savage. They're very, very organized. Tax regimes, even the trust law has been voted in the beginning of the year. It goes more and more towards the Western ways. And there's no really risk of having your business taken from you, or some dramatic changes that happen from one day to another. I think the Cambodian government is very progressive. They're open to some crazy ideas. They're innovative in a way. It's rather surprising. Myself with my startup, I met the ministers with some ideas I had, which I thought will not be accepted, and they were actually accepted, and we're actually working on it today. So businessmen would be surprised how flexible and progressive the government can be. In the same time, it's still a developing country. So you also have, as I said, this balance between very modern and very traditional at the same time. But there's very low risk of drastic negative changes that might affect your business.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about the infrastructure in Cambodia. So a company hires workers. They want the workers to arrive on time. To do that, they need good infrastructure, good roads, and things like that. So you can talk about the physical infrastructure and then the technological infrastructure. So availability of internet. I think they're doing well with 5G. Cambodia has 5G and blockchain. So
yeah, I think that the first thing to say about that is mentalities, right? If you want your workers to be on time, you need your workers to want to be on time. Cambodians are very respectful. They arrive on time. They do their job. They're very committed to what they do. And in that regard, we do have a lot of similarities with Israelis. In terms of physical infrastructure, Phnom Penh is not a city that has been built for so many people, so there are a lot of traffic jams. But in the same time, there's been a lot of effort that have been made to develop infrastructure. I think we have most of the highways that are almost finished. By 2023, 2024, we're going to have cross-country 60-meter roads that will connect the big cities, which will shorten travel time significantly, and also will reduce logistic costs, because logistic cost is one of the problems we have in Cambodia today. In terms of the technology, the internet, Cambodia's internet is probably better than the one I have in Europe. The 5G, 4G, I mean, you have an all-inclusive internet plan for $1 per week. It's very in that regard, Cambodia is very developed. The internet penetration rate in Cambodia is off the chart, is over 90%. Pretty much, there are 16 million inhabitants and 21 million phone subscriptions in Cambodia. That tells you a lot. And I think that's the consequences of having a very young population. They're young, they're connected. A lot of interconnection is done on Facebook. It's very dynamic as a culture.
Okay, so maybe we can talk a little bit about the relationship between Israel and Cambodia. So like on a geopolitical level, how close is the friendship between Israel and Cambodia? Do they often vote together on the same issues at places like the UN? Or
look, I don't have all the data about all the times there was votes, because Israel is one of the most voted upon country in the world. For example, in the last vote to include Israel in the Asian Development Bank, Cambodia was favored, so she voted for Israel. There have been relationships in the past. It kind of lost the relationships, during the war. And right now, the Israel embassy that covers Cambodia is the embassy in Bangkok. So we don't have an embassy or a consulate in Cambodia. The Chamber of Commerce, we play this role a little bit, but there is a will from the side of the Cambodian government to collaborate with Israel. The delegation we just had last week is a good example. We had 16 delegates, and some of them are from the government, the Cambodian Innovation Authority and Entrepreneurship Development Fund. So there is a real will to collaborate with Israel. On the other hand, there's also a will from the side of the Israelis. I gotta say the Israelis are more prudent because it seems they know less about Cambodia than Cambodia knows about Israel. So we had the ambassador come over. She was more than happy. She was actually very surprised by the welcome she had. And we're going to have a diplomat mission to Cambodia in the beginning of 2023. So slowly, these, the ties, the relationship is getting tighter. And one of our important jobs is to let Israelis know what happens in Cambodia. I believe that Cambodia holds a tremendous development potential, and it will be a shame for Israeli companies not to be able to benefit from it. And in the same time, I believe that the Israeli companies and Israel as a country has a lot to offer to Cambodia, since contrary to what people think, there's a lot of similarity between the Jewish people and the Khmer people, more than one think. Our history is very similar. They had the Khmer and the Funan Empire. We had the Hebrew Empire in the time of the kings. We had our own trauma. They had their own trauma. And after the trauma, the way we managed this trauma was very similar. We had about 10 years of chaos in Israel. And then the diaspora came back with a lot of knowledge and money and helped build the country. That's what happened after the 90s in Cambodia as well. A lot of Khmer diaspora came back and helped build the country. Today, you have a lot of young ministers. You had a lot of business owners that are educated in the best universities in the world. So then Israel decided in the end of the 80s to become a technology powerhouse and invested a lot of resources into it. A lot of smart thing has been done at that time. Cambodia has made the same decision 5 years ago, and Khmer Enterprise, which is the Cambodian Innovation Authority, has been created and have a lot of budgets to build and support the ecosystem in Cambodia. There's like a lot of similarities. And also, as I said, the Khmer people have this identity fire, which we have. I think the biggest success of Israel is the creation of the Jewish identity. I'm, for myself, half Yemenite, half Iraqi. And if you think about it, you take an Ashkenazi Jew from Poland, for example, we don't have much in common, right? Different culture, different weather, different habits. But when we're in Israel, we're the same. We're all Jewish, and this is a brotherhood that allowed to create the country. And I think that Cambodian have it as well. When you talk to them about the Khmer Empire, they have sparkles in their eyes, and that's something that I think that should give them a lot of hope for their future development.
So geopolitically, why is Cambodia important for Israel? Does having a business in Cambodia help reach the entire region? Or are there other reasons why Cambodia may be important for Israel?
I call Cambodia the Brussels of Southeast Asia. It's very well placed. You're within an hour and a half flight of every capital in the region. It's very easy to move from Cambodia to any other place. Cambodia is nobody's enemy. Is kind of as a respected country that's respected by all, little cousin of China without being controlled by China. So Cambodia, for me, the way I see it is it has a double advantage for Israeli companies. If you talk about the geopolitical one, is that it's a gateway to the fastest growing market in the world, Southeast Asia. You know that Cambodia had a growth of 7.7% average on the last 15 years prior to COVID, which was the highest in the world. And this door to a market that is very dynamic with 640 million people, the ASEAN, the 11 countries. And the difference of other countries, Cambodia is very progressive. Like the vehicular currencies, the US dollars. So you have your bank account in US dollars, so you avoid currency risks. There's no limit on capital for entering and exiting capital, so you can transfer money back and forth. Taxation is rather low. We're talking 10 to 15%. As I said, you can open a company as a foreign loan. The banking system is rather developed. So I think this country is really going the right way, and it's a great opportunity for Israeli companies to come and implement. Specifically, that there is a very important trend in the world that pushes people to produce as near as possible to the end user. And I know a lot of Israeli, I had this discussion with a VC fund yesterday, a lot of Israeli look at the United States as the primary market. I think historically it just makes sense. Southeast Asia is a very dynamic market that is bigger than the United States in terms of number of users. I do think, I don't say by any means that they need to get away from the United States. I think that's always going to be number one market for the Israeli companies. But I think they need to look at Southeast Asia as a place to grow further. And Cambodia is probably the best place in Southeast Asia to establish yourself.
Okay, so you mentioned China. Maybe we can talk about that for a minute. So my understanding is Cambodia is getting a lot of investments from China's Belt and Road program. So maybe you can talk about that. And is there a risk of receiving too much business or financial support from China? Some countries that default, they realize that their ports are taken over by the Chinese and so forth.
I think the Cambodian government management of the relationship with China is pretty smart. There's a lot of help from China, as you mentioned in the Belt and Road program. Cambodia is a key place for the Chinese, both for land, air, and sea transport. So the investment the Chinese are doing in Cambodia is not only serving Cambodia, but also serving the grand plan of China. But in the same time, the Cambodians they don't belong to China. A lot of people mistake the help Cambodia received to a political engagement. Cambodia is a neutral country. They would work with Chinese, they would work with the Americans or with the Europeans or with the Israelis. They would collaborate with anyone that has something to offer to the development of the country. I think that's the main rule that they have. For example, they had a big problem with the overbuilding in Cambodia and gambling. So the Cambodian government suspended licenses from gambling from Chinese companies. And they do react when there is a problem. They're not under the control of China. But since China is probably the strongest country that was available and was willing to support the development, and Cambodia rode that horse. If tomorrow we have the same opportunity with any other countries, the Cambodian will not be against it. They're very progressive in the way they see interaction with other countries.
So does China's Belt and Road program mean that the Chinese are literally building lots of roads through Cambodia to deliver supplies and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the Belt and Road program, the Chinese Belt and Road program, is that they would like to reconnect the world the way it was at the Silk Road at the time, right? So they do build roads. Well, Cambodia has already 4 international airports, which I think is consequent. but they are building the facilities, the port as well. They would like to make the Sihanouk port one of the most important ports of the region. So yeah, most of the support from China comes under the form of logistics, which actually works really well into the hands of the Cambodian, because the logistics is their main obstacle today.
Okay, and what does Cambodia see in Israel? What is the importance of Israel to Cambodia?
Cambodian people have a lot of respect to Israel. Even when you go to the furthest villages and you say you come from Israel, they tell you, oh, Israel, which means good. And if you ask them why it's good, they don't really know to explain. But they do know something good happens in Israel. When you're Israeli, you're considered smart. You're considered successful, because that's the image that Israel projected in Asia, in China as well, by the way. And so there is a huge respect to what Israel has been able to accomplish. Such a small country in such a small period of time, being so successful, and there is a will to learn from it and to emulate it in a way by adapting it to the Cambodian mentality, and that's also a big part of what we do, is to help them create those bridges. I think Israel has done in the past what Cambodia is trying to do today, and more than once. And I think that working with Israeli experts is really something that could benefit the development of Cambodia. There is one more thing I really like with the Israeli experts, having worked in emerging markets pretty much my whole adult life, is that Israelis don't have any, colonial mindset. We come to work. We like to get dirty. We go on our knees and we put our hands in the ground. We don't tell people what to do. We do ourselves. We come with a lot of respect of what exists. We know we don't know the best. We know we have knowledge, but the locals also have knowledge. We really come with the idea of exchanging knowledge rather than just pouring knowledge. And I think the most important, the Israeli, they come, they do, and they leave. They don't try to control anyone. We have already enough problems with this as it is. Yeah. So we really come to work, and I think that I've noticed that the relationship that the Israeli experts develop with the locals, with the Cambodians, are not only in Cambodians. I've done projects in Africa. It was the same. Are very personal. Israelis are very. Everybody's a brother in a second, right? Very open, direct. Sometimes considered rude. The Hebrew language doesn't have a lot of politeness words in it, so sometimes when we speak English we might be a little bit too direct, but in the end of the day I think it's appreciated because the relationship is real and it's direct, and there is a real will to transfer knowledge. Israeli experts were very, very happy when we see the counterpart being able to do by himself. So we started to work, and then we see that they mastered the thing, and for us it's a success. And I think that's something that I haven't seen in a lot of other experts. So that's something that's, from my experience, right, very particular to Israeli experts. And that's one of the reasons I was very keen on helping bringing Israeli experts to Cambodia and to support the energy that has been originated in Cambodia, right, of technology development, R&D, agriculture. I think that's really exciting for me to be able to be part of that.
What is Israel doing to help the Cambodians accelerate their innovation ecosystem, maybe on a government-to-government level, venture capital level, or academia to academia level?
Oh, you touched the three sectors that we're working on, right? Cambodia is not yet in the position to do a joint R&D with Israel. The discrepancy is too big, but I do believe that because the population is so young and that the capacity level is so high, that's something that we could reach in the next 5 years. So our goal, we have actually the delegation that came to Israel was working on creating a official collaboration between the countries and on the tech side. That's something that probably will be effective in the next couple of months. Up until today, most of the support came in the form of agriculture expert from the Volcanic Institute or from different Israeli companies, mainly on the agriculture development, greenhouse development, and sustainable agriculture. I think now I don't want to say thanks to our action. I do think we contribute to that, but there's more and more collaboration. Some Israeli startups working in Cambodia, selling technology to Cambodians, and non-agriculture related, fintech related, for example. We have 3 Israeli startups that are going to come implement their pilots in Cambodia in the beginning of 2023. We're discussing with a extraordinary collaborative bioengineering lab in Israel called Collab Square to implement a collaborative bioengineering lab in Cambodia, working together with different universities. We're working on creating links between the universities so we could have student exchanges for other things in agriculture. So all those things that you mentioned that I do believe is the future are things that are on the table right now and are being handled as we speak.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple Israeli startups in Cambodia. Are there any larger Israeli companies operating in Cambodia, and which industries are they involved with besides agriculture?
The big Israeli companies are not yet implemented in Cambodia. I cannot disclose the name, but there's one very big Israeli brand that is in talks that I was in touch with, and I connected them with the right people that are looking for production facilities in Cambodia. So it is something that really is being built. I think that Israelis, they always look for the next place to do business. We're very dynamic in the way we work, and I think that now that we brought to their attention the potential in Cambodia, we're having more and more companies that are looking for collaborations. If I can mention one very positive collaboration that happened a few years ago, but that was originated by Cambodian people. We actually have, the biggest dairy farm in Cambodia is an Israeli dairy farm. Is a collaboration between 2 Cambodian businessmen and 2 Israeli businessmen that brought all the equipment from Israel, and the cows, if I'm not mistaken, came from Australia, and now we have Israeli milk. Very high tech, high production, quality, and all the other products around dairy products. And that's rather new. And I think that's today the biggest agriculture collaboration. It's a multi-million-dollar project that is very, very successful, and that the ambassador visited, by the way. I think that's just it shows the potential. The way they did it with it's called Kirisu Farm. It shows that those collaborations are possible, and that the mentalities are not so different, and that the collaborations are fructuous if we do them, if we believe in them and work towards it. So that's I think brings a big hope for collaboration between the countries. I do believe that in the next 2 years, the bigger Israeli companies are slowly going to arrive to Cambodia as well.
So it seems that Cambodia is a little bit more like China compared to Israel in terms of having a strong authoritarian government that can allow large companies to dominate an industry. So in India, there's more concern. Well, okay, there's a big company, successful company, but what about all these little farmers that are going to be put out of business because, of advances that a large company is making? Whereas in China, government has control, and, that would be allowed to go forward. So in Cambodia, as the milk farmers are, having success, the government will allow that to continue and won't be too terribly concerned about these little farmers that may be displaced.
So I'm going to answer it in 2 parts. The first part is the Cambodian government is not at all, they do take into consideration the small farmers. There's a lot of efforts that are made to support the small farmers. Maybe not always the most efficient one, but it's always on the table. It's always a discussion that is on the table. And for example, myself with the chamber, we have a big sustainability event coming in the beginning of 2023, working with the Ministry of Agriculture, etc. One of the emphases of the ministry is let's not forget that our end goal is to support local farmers. How can we help them be more efficient? So the question of supporting local farmers is very important from the discussion I've had. It's something that they hold dear to their heart. The implementation of bigger farmers is not coming instead. Cambodia is 9 times the size of Israel. It's 182,000 kilometers square. And in terms of the amount of population, we're talking 16 million comparing to the 10 million in Israel. So there's a lot of space of fertile land. Cambodia is importing 75% of its food today. So there's a lot of space for everyone to come and implement. And I think the government's job will be to find the right balance between foreign companies coming and supporting local agricultures, our local farmers. I do believe they're going to take it into account because, again, in all the discussions I've had, it always comes up to the table because Cambodia is about 60% farmers today. So it is something that is very important for them. And I think, again, there is a place, and I think that there's a need for a lot of knowledge transfer. Local farmers need to be able to become more efficient in the way that they do agriculture. We talk about irrigation systems, for example. Most of local farmers are not irrigated. Local farms are not irrigated, and I think there's a need to move towards smarter irrigation. Specifically, in Cambodia has a lot of water. It's not an issue, but the water doesn't come through the whole year. You have a lot of water for a short period of time, and then you can have droughts of a few months. So I think knowing how to manage water sources and implementing the right type of irrigation will go a long way, making Cambodia's agriculture efficient. Other than this, on a more personal note, Cambodia is a young population, so I think there's also another way to think is to say, okay, how can we find the balance between the need of farmers and the need of technicians, engineers, developers? Pushing everyone to be a farmer is probably not the best thing for the future development of the country. Pushing everyone to be an engineer is not a solution either. Because they're very young, which means still there's a lot of flexibility. I think one of the things the government should do is to find the balance between pushing people towards let's call them the higher end professions as engineers and technicians and developers, which there's a big lack of in the world, or against pushing people towards modern and efficient agriculture. I think it's not as simple as bringing the big companies or supporting the small farmers. I think it's a question of balance here for Cambodia.
Does Cambodia need help managing its growth in terms of infrastructure, building more highways and developing cities, or do they have enough competence to do that themselves?
So there are a few Cambodian construction companies that are doing very, very good job, both in building roads and buildings. You have a lot of foreign companies, specifically Asian companies from Korea, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, China. So there's a lot of know-how in that.
Okay. All right, great. And maybe one of the last questions, what kinds of products from Cambodia can be found in Israel? Are there some foods that are...
You say can be found, so I'll answer the question as it is. Can be found. Cambodia is a big exporter of rice. Cambodian rice is regularly voted as the best rice in the world. A lot of the Cambodian produce is regularly voted the best in the world. It's the case for the kampot pepper, it's the case for the cashew nut and for the rice. The reason is that it's a very big land, untapped. We never had massive agriculture in Cambodia. So the fertility and the quality of the land is very high. So they do have a lot of very good produce. Now, Cambodians do not excel yet on branding their own products. So what happens is that the neighboring countries, specifically Vietnam, buy Cambodian produce and sell them as part of their own production. So you might find Cambodian rice in Israel labeled Vietnamese or Thai rice, but you will not find specific products from Cambodia with a Cambodian brand, even though we do have in Kompot, we have an Israeli guy called Ido that has a Sela pepper, that is an Israeli Kompot pepper Cambodian brand. But there's not yet a well-established Cambodian produced brand. I think that's something that is highly needed and that will arrive in the next years. So you will not find directly a Cambodian brand, but you would find Cambodian produce within other producers.
Okay. And maybe the last question. My understanding is there's a lot of landmines that are still in Cambodia from the wars. And there's a lot of amputees because they step on the landmines. Is Israel doing anything to help with either detecting the landmines or helping the amputees?
So as for now, we don't have a lot of activity on those sectors from Israel. I got to say, I don't have the exact number on the landmines, to be honest, but I got to say the problem of the landmines around the cities is pretty much resolved. You still do have in the province, you still have areas that are dangerous. The government is handling that as well with the army. It is still a problem, not the big problem if you're a tourist and coming to the city, but it is a problem in terms of the nation. What we do have in Israel, we have the Jewish agency that opened a project in Siem Reap, where we have Jewish volunteers coming and working with the kids and doing some creativity and entrepreneurship programs with the children. We are in talks with them to extend it to teacher training as well. So those, in terms of like the nonprofit, those are the main things that are done from the Israeli side for now. I do hope to see it grow. I have different Israeli NGOs that we're in touch with, that we're inviting to come to Cambodia, one among which you have Eco Ocean, that are cleaning oceans, that I intend to invite to Cambodia at the beginning of 2023. We visit them with a delegation a few weeks ago. So I do hope, the NGO sector in Israel is very developed. The Israelis care a lot, and I would like it to show also. So that's definitely something that I hope will grow in the next years.
Okay, and feel free to end this session by saying anything you want, anything about the future of the connection between Israel and Cambodia.
Well, I always say the present of Cambodia is agriculture, the future of Cambodia is R&D. I think we have a lot in common. I will encourage any Cambodian entrepreneur or company to get in touch with us, to come and visit, to have a look. There's no better impression than the impression you can have yourself when you come. And I do promise, if you come, you will be surprised. And we are here for anything that we can do to help in terms of implementation, contacts, whatnot. You can rely on us. We'll do our best to help. And I do hope to see more and more Israeli companies and Jewish businessmen come over and support the development of this country.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was an excellent session. So I'd like to thank Moran Hadad, president of the Cambodia-Israel Chamber of Commerce, for delivering an excellent session. Very informative, really fascinating. Thank you, Moran.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you for having me.